And the Nazi goal was to replace, and this is right from a historical evaluation of the events, the Nazi goal was to replace the Bible with Mein Kampf, My Struggle. Indeed, that's what they were trying to do. Hermann Goering was the second most powerful Nazi, and he was a leader of persecuting the churches. And it's interesting, Goering said, we've got to destroy the churches, and over Hitler says, look, one thing at a time. Let's deal with Russia. Let's win the war. There's plenty of time to destroy the churches. I agree, that's the end goal, but look, one thing at a time. In fact, I have a whole book I haven't read yet, but a whole book basically is titled Hitler the Conservative. And in many ways, he was a conservative. He once told the scientists, you guys will blow up the world if we let you. Hold off. We'll take care of one concern at a time. Just give us time. And the scientists said, nope, let's develop this. And they were talking about the atomic bomb. Germany was very, not as far now as we realize they thought they were, but we knew Germany was developing the atomic bomb, partially because a number of the leading scientists in Germany worked with the Americans before the war. And therefore, we knew that they had the capabilities of developing the bomb. And Hitler was the one who basically says, no, we'll end up destroying not just our own people, but others as well, including Germans. And so he was basically conservative. The same thing was true, by the way, when they were developing poisons. They developed a number of really deadly poisons. And Hitler put the quash on that as well, because he said, what happens when the wind blows? It blows it the other way, and we end up killing a lot of our soldiers. And Hitler was concerned about that because he was poisoned with gas in World War I. Was blinded for several weeks, I think it was. So therefore, he basically, according to this book, he basically put the brakes over and over on what his academics, his military leaders, and the professors at the universities wanted to do. And those are just a few examples. And there are many others. Okay, Darwinism is the engine that drives atheism. And a few modern quotes now. Richard Dawkins, he said, evolution allows one to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. And this really is a profound statement, because for most of history, if you try to explain the world around you, what explanation did people give? Even Plato and Aristotle and so on, even from cultures that you wouldn't expect them to be theists, they were, because how else do you explain the existence of a creation without a creator? And therefore, Richard Dawkins felt evolution allows one to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. We no longer have to say, well, gee, I have no idea. Now we can say, well, mutations, natural selection, that's how we all got here. Therefore, he had an explanation for the reality Darwin did, and also Richard Dawkins did. And it's interesting to listen to Richard Dawkins if you haven't before. He's British, and of course a lot of his examples are from Great Britain, but he almost sounds like a Methodist minister. Evolution is so wonderful, so incredibly beautiful, wonderful, miraculous. It's just awe-inspiring. He spoke of evolution as if it was a saint. I guess to him it was. And of course the atheists, as I mentioned, push evolution. The top scientists, now I mentioned earlier, AAAS, it was 99%. Well, another study of another group, this was the leading scientists of this, who were members of the National Association of I forget the name, but one of the leading scientific organizations. Of that group, 98% were atheists. So we're talking about the vast majority of scientists are atheists, and of course Darwinists. And yet, as I present in my other lectures, the case against Darwinism is overwhelming. And why is evolution believed? Well, social factors. Most people, by nature, as I mentioned, conform. And that, when styles change, it's amazing. When I started teaching at Bowling Green State University, the style for guys was long hair, back to the middle of their back. And hardly anyone came in without long hair. Every now and then when some guy came in with short hair, like most of you guys have now, some guy came in with short hair, people would wonder, what's his problem? What's going on? Why don't you dress like everybody else does? Well, there was a few nonconformists, but by and large, most people conform. And this is one thing that we've studied when we look at Nazi Germany. Indeed, if you lived in Nazi Germany at that time, would you be out there killing Jews? I know of a lot of you can say, well, I wouldn't do that. Yes, probably you'd be out there doing the same thing that they were doing. And this is, as I mentioned before, one thing they noticed about many of the Nazis when they talked to their neighbors, oh, he's a very nice man. Boy, he comes over and helps us with the lawn, and he's a very good person. So many of them were judged very good persons by those who knew them, by their family, by their relatives, their neighbors, and so on. Well, they were good people, and that's important because how do you get good people to do such awful things? Well, we know now that social factors are critically important, are very, very important. And when I read tons of stuff on science, I think I mentioned about a book a week on the average, although my wife says don't brag because she reads twice as much as I do. She reads about 2 books. Sometimes she reads 3 books a week. So if she was here, she'd say, now, hubby, honey, don't brag. You know, no reason to brag. I'm 3 times better than you are in this area. Well, she is. She reads a lot more than I do. But nonetheless, and I have a lot of films. I have lots, hundreds, well, actually thousands of films. And invariably, no matter what they're about, the books or the films, invariably they get a plug for Darwinism. Now, they may not try to defend it. They may say, well, when we were living as apes, or when we were evolving from whatever, a common ancestor. And so it's not usually direct trying to convince you. It just assumes it's true. And so when you say things over and over and over, when you read things, when you hear things over and over and over, you're going to become as convinced it's true. And when one comes along like me and says, well, you know, the evidence against evolution is overwhelming, they look at me and, what's your problem? Where are you coming from? Why would you say something so foolish? Everybody knows evolution is true. Everybody knows we evolved from apes. I had my colleagues at the college over and over say this. Everyone knows this. Well, let's talk about it. One fellow was an expert in snakes. He was a herpetologist. He did his doctoral thesis on snakes, and I did an article on the evolution of snakes. And I showed that there is no evidence for the evolution of snakes. The first snake is a snake. And the evolution is not there. And this is widely admitted in books about snakes. So I gave him a copy of my article, and I said, could you read that? And he says, well, no, because I know you're wrong. But how do you know unless you've read it? Well, I know. Why should I waste my time reading an article I know is wrong? Snakes evolved like everything else did. And yeah, we may not have the evidence, but hey, give us time. We'll find it. It's there. We just have to keep looking. And as far as I know, he never read the article. But I thought he'd be interested because that was his area. He could probably critique it, and he could probably find some mistakes I made in the article, and that's fine. But he didn't care to read it. And each level of education, creations are filtered out. It's harder for them to get into college, to get through college, to get into graduate school, to get out of graduate school, to get into doctoral programs, to get out of doctoral programs, to get a job and to keep the job. Every area they're filtered out. Now, how do some survive? Well, they stay in the closet. Sometimes if you're a minority, that helps. If you're black or a female, you have a little bit more flexibility. Although I've had a number of black colleagues that were creationists that didn't make it either, so that's not going to guarantee you'll make it. But it's sometimes easier if you're a minority in some way that you can get through because they give you a pass, where you wouldn't be able to if you were white. White guys, of course, are... the school where I substituted for class, they needed somebody, so I came in and substituted. And the reason I substituted was because the girls took a field trip. They went to a steel mill so you could interest the girls in becoming part of industry, becoming steel workers. And they all went, and none of the guys went, and they were mad. We want to go, and why weren't we able to go? Why did they just take the girls? Well, it turns out they got a grant from the government just to take the girls, so they get girls interested in working in a steel mill. And so when the girls came back, I asked them, well, you guys ready to change your major from accounting to welding? And they all said no. In fact, several girls said when they left, they smelled. And they had to take a shower. They felt awful. They said, if anything, that convinced me there's no way I want to work in a steel mill. There's no way I'm going to do that. So the government spent lots of money to bring these girls. They had to hire a bus, and they drove an hour to the steel mill in Delta, Ohio, by the way. And they did the opposite. So the government's trying to make sure that in every profession you have 50% males, 50% females. And they rate the colleges according to how successful you are. And most colleges are not very successful because girls just don't want to be welders. And guys just don't want to be nurses, although that's a good profession for guys, because we need male nurses. And when I teach in the health science students, I stress, you guys can actually make more money than the gals because you're a male, because we need male nurses, so therefore you make more money. You'll be the first hired if you're a male nurse. It's a good job for a male. But wasn't able to convince many people. We still had only 2 or 3 out of every 100 males that want to be nurses. So it's hard to change this. But anyway, social pressure is very important.